Gail Harper had worked as a flight attendant for nearly a decade, gliding between time zones and translating the unspoken language of the air to scores of travelers. Her silhouette, perpetually framed against the backdrop of endless aisles, had become comfortingly familiar. Yet, amid the rhythm and routine, an undercurrent of dissatisfaction tugged at her thoughts. Each flight represented a cycle unbroken, offering little more than fleeting interactions and ephemeral pleasantries. As the days folded into one another, she ached for something more, a break from the carousel of anonymity and a desperate need to make a name for herself in an industry ruled by silent efficiency. Stepping into JFK Airport on a humid August afternoon, Gail clutched her boarding documents, which felt more like chains than wings. The concourse buzzed with a symphony of hurried footsteps and faint intercom announcements, each reverberating through her chest in a drone that was all-consuming. Her starched uniform clung to her frame, a symbol of order and hospitality, yet it felt inexplicably suffocating today, as if it were a corset squeezing her unsatisfied ambitions. The flight from New York to Los Angeles promised nothing more than the expected. However, as Gail adjusted her navy blue neck scarf and scanned the incoming passengers, an unfamiliar tension settled over her. Her eyes, trained expertly to detect anomalies among travelers, landed on a family of 4. They moved with a quiet assurance, their laughter bubbling up like a fresh spring in a silent forest, instantly drawing the gaze of those around them. This was the Brooks family, though Gail did not know their names, only that they exuded an aura that suggested gravitas. Richard Brooks, an imposing figure with kind eyes and an easy smile, was flanked by his wife, Lauren, whose presence was warm and welcoming against the sterile environment of the airport. Their 2 children, a boy and a girl, exhibited a grace beyond their years, walking ahead with eager anticipation that only youthful innocence can afford. "Welcome aboard," Gail began mechanically, her smile as polished as her shoes. But beneath the facade of professionalism, something flickered. She wondered, as she often did, about the lives she brushed against so briefly. Who were they truly once they exited the plane, stepping into the fullness of their lives? An awkward pause took hold during the Brooks family's boarding process. A discrepancy with their seating arrangements appeared on her manifest, a pair of seats double-booked, a rarity she'd encountered only a handful of times. Richard attempted to address the situation with a kind yet firm tone. "Excuse me, we seem to have an issue with our seating assignments. Both my wife and I have tickets for seats 12A and 12B, but it seems they've also been assigned to someone else." Gail felt a knot tighten in her chest. Her drive to assert control over the situation overpowered her sense of discretion. Her desire to distinguish herself, to prove her worth as a competent and decisive figure in her role, began to eclipse her should-be patient demeanor. "I'm sure it's just a system error," Gail replied, her voice taking on an edge sharper than she intended. "Please step aside so I can sort this out." Richard nodded, guiding Lauren and the children back toward the boarding gate, creating a momentary lapse in the boarding routine. Gail busied herself with fevered typing into the archaic computer system, aware of the weight of eyes upon her back. Her pulse quickened, wrapped in the pressure of asserting herself correctly under the gaze of her peers and superiors. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity, as Gail grappled with the stubborn terminal keys that refused to yield the resolution she hoped for. Her mind spun with her own expectations, magnified by the perception that this moment could define or dismantle her standing. Her sense of self-worth hung tenuously, like a precariously balanced plane in a rough patch of air. When an elderly couple appeared at the scene, claiming their rightful seats were in fact 12A and 12B, Gail felt a swell of justification. She grasped at the opportunity to reclaim order with a sense of finality. However, this time, her judgment was more reaction than reason. "Our hands are tied," Gail proclaimed, her voice slipping into autopilot, void of the empathy she prided herself on. "I'm afraid you'll need to vacate the plane until we can address this issue post-departure." Richard's eyes, softened by years of experience and seasoned with patience, met hers with understanding rather than anger. His calmness was unnerving, a ripple that ran counter to the chaos she felt stirring inside. "We'll wait outside," he said simply, guiding his family through the cabin's crowded confines and back out into the terminal. Gale watched them leave, sensing a disquiet not from their reaction, but from her own. The echoes of unrest buzzed louder in her ears as she resumed her duties, the motion around her tinged with an unfamiliar gravity. She resumed her positions with mechanical efficiency, yet the vibrance of her interactions grew muted, as if someone had dimmed the cabin lights prematurely. As the plane ascended past the flickering constellations of city lights below, Gale struggled to shake a thread of doubt weaving itself into her fabric of authority. Whatever satisfaction she sought vanished, leaving a haunting whisper in its wake, a subtle reminder that power in fleeting moments is but a shadow, cast larger than its substance. Little did she know, the echo of this encounter was far from over. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the dimly lit cabin was filled with the gentle hum of the engines, like a lullaby trying to calm Gale's ever-increasing disquiet. Her movements were methodical, yet fraught with a nagging tension that coiled in her stomach. She served black coffee and waters, her hands moving in autopilot as thoughts ricocheted with unsettling vigor. Unease clung to her like the scent of stale recirculated air, always present, impossible to ignore. From the galley, the murmurs of her colleagues provided a backdrop to her introspection. Words floated overhead, carried by invisible currents of speculation. Apparently, the Brooks family wasn't just any family. Richard Brooks, she heard through snippets, was a pivotal figure at Skyline Aviation, someone with the kind of influence that could alter fortunes with a whispered word. The realization struck Gale with a visceral clarity, the type that crashes unbidden in quiet moments. Her hands stilled mid-air as if pausing could somehow halt the cascading aftermath of her earlier decisions. She felt her grip on control slipping, like trying to grasp at sand grains with a clenched fist. The truth was tacitly understood. Her actions had been more a reflection of her inner turmoil than any legitimate judgment of protocols breached or orders upheld. Images of the Brooks family replayed in her mind. Richard's calm, Lauren's quiet dignity, the children's innocent curiosity, all soured by her own defensive maneuvering. The gravity of her misjudgment settled over her like a leaden shroud. "Gale, you okay?" a voice broke through. Denise, one of her fellow attendants, looked at her with a hint of concern. Denise had been a mentor of sorts, her eyes wise with years of navigating skies filled with both turbulence and tranquility. "Just caught in my thoughts, that's all," Gale replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Denise leaned closer, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "I heard about what happened. Tough break with the seating, huh? They seemed so understanding though, especially given." "Well, you know who they are, right?" Gale nodded, the knot in her chest tightening. "Yeah, I know now. Should have handled it differently." As Denise moved to assist another passenger, Gale stood still, isolated within her silent torrent. This was more than just a professional misstep. It was a reckoning. Suddenly, flight had dual meanings, both the physical act of soaring above clouds and the internal battle of fleeing from uncomfortable truths. Was her ambition weaponized by insecurity? Had her need to be noticed, to matter in a personal capacity, overshadowed her sense of humanity? These questions punctured old certainties, releasing a cascade of self-doubt. The plane continued its westward journey across the canvas of the twilight sky, while Gale's contemplation traveled much deeper. With each passing mile, she dissected her actions. Her path chosen not out of malice but from an impulsive need to claim agency in a world where she felt increasingly invisible. Yet now, that very impulsiveness had dismantled her carefully constructed veneer of control. Hours later, the aircraft began its descent over the sprawling lights of Los Angeles. Externally, her movements remained disciplined, an exemplar of professional duty. Internally, every fiber of her being shouted against the impending confrontation she knew awaited. As the aircraft navigated through the patchwork of city lights, Gale longed for closure, a chance to attempt reconciliation, to understand and be understood. The moment the seatbelt sign winked off, she knew there was no delaying the inevitable. Landing provided no comfort. The whir of the engine's downshifting was echoed by the crowd's soft bustle, a symphony of people unaware of the tempest within her. As passengers began gathering their belongings, Gail's heartbeats synchronized with the hurried chaos. She watched passengers disembark, and with each passing figure, felt the inevitable approach of the Brooks family. When they finally emerged from the cabin, Richard's eyes met hers with a kind of dignified reserve, his expression offering a glimmer of something unanticipated, perhaps a silent encouragement. "Mr. Brooks, if I could have a moment," Gail began, her voice faltering slightly. I want to apologize. The way I handled things was wrong." Her words were weighted by sincerity, yet still sounded inadequate in her ears. Richard studied her for a heartbeat longer, his expression kind but inscrutable. "It takes courage to admit mistakes," he said. "What matters is what you choose to do next." His words offered a lifeline, a possibility she hadn't dared hope for, a chance for redemption. Gail nodded, her heart twisting with a mix of gratitude and self-reproach for what had been a squandered opportunity to simply listen and understand from the start. The family turned to leave, and as they walked down the gangway, Gail watched them disappear into the river of humanity, swept inexorably forward while she stood on its bank, contemplating the eddies of consequence they left in their wake. With their departure, Gail was left not in silence but in an emergent clarity that mirrored the new day outside. The realization solidified within that this reckoning was not an end but a beginning, a chance for actualization, to align her outward ambitions with her internal compass. As she stepped out onto the tarmac where twilight had given way to dawn, Gail felt the first inklings of hope. There was still time to chart a new course and redefine the horizon she once viewed through a veil of doubt and division. From this vantage point, each day was a promise waiting to unfold, and with it, an opportunity to soar anew. Days passed in a haze of introspection, each one pulling Gail Harper further from the sureness she had once polished so meticulously. Her days were spent replaying her ill-fated encounter with Richard Brooks and his family, her nights filled with restless dreams leaping between skies both turbulent and placid. It was as though her conscience had been infused with the thrill of acrobatics, never touching down long enough to offer rest. The executive suite of Skyline Aviation loomed before her like a solemn behemoth awaiting judgment. As Gail approached the glass doors, her heart beat a slow, deliberate tattoo against her ribcage, a reminder of each misstep that brought her here. The receptionist led her down a corridor that seemed to stretch into infinite possibilities, each framed photograph a testament to milestones she had yet to comprehend. With every step, she half expected the plush carpet to give way beneath her, but it remained firm, urging her steady progression. Her arrival at Richard Brooks's threshold felt like the moment before takeoff, the engines thrumming beneath her feet, the gravitational pull both frightening and exhilarating. She stood at the precipice, waiting for clearance to ascend into unknown skies. The office was spacious, grounded in warmth and light, the kind that drew admiration rather than intimidation. Behind the meticulously organized desk sat Richard Brooks, a figure of quiet command, whose bearing spoke of mountains weathered and storms calmed. It was a man who needed no grand gestures, for respect followed him as the natural course follows the river's bend. "Ms. Harper, please have a seat," he offered, gesturing toward a chair positioned across from where he sat. Although his tone was inviting, Gail found her resolve wavering, a fragile kite dancing on the unpredictable winds of change. Taking a seat, she felt the weight of expectation settle around her like a dense fog, her every breath a conscious decision. She focused on Richard's eyes, their depth reminiscent of vast, uncharted territories. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," she began. Her voice came alive with the pent-up emotion she had rehearsed countless times, a symphony of discomfort and sincerity. "I know words sometimes fall short, but I need you to know how deeply sorry I am for what happened." Richard crossed his hands under his chin, contemplating her with an expression that held neither judgment nor contempt, but rather an open invitation to honesty. "Ms. Harper," he began, each syllable a measured step upon a fragile bridge. "Our encounter on that flight was unexpected. Of course, not every day does one's journey so directly intersect with someone else's." Gail nodded, feeling an unfamiliar vulnerability crack open the shell she had enclosed around herself. "I was wrong," she faltered, but found strength in the admission. "So very wrong to react as I did." Richard leaned back, his expression shifting subtly, akin to a sailor surveying the horizon, assessing the nature of forthcoming winds. "I appreciate your candor," he acknowledged. "Most particularly because it's not easy to face our own inadequacies." Her mind flashed to moments of subtle bias she had ignored, the assumptions that had laid quietly, unnoticed but persistent, like background noise one tunes out. The confrontation was as much with herself as it was with the consequences of her actions. "You see, Gail," Richard continued, his tone gentle yet unyielding, "this isn't solely about policies or professionalism. It's a deeper challenge. The challenge of respecting every person's journey. Skyline was established with the belief that the sky belongs to all of us equally, a vision my family has held for generations." The magnitude of his words pressed upon her, the realization that her actions had belittled what should have been embraced, a shared human story. "When I chose to remove your family from the plane, I couldn't see past my own needs to assert control," she confessed, the shame and regret a balm in acknowledging. "Courage isn't simply the absence of fear. It's acknowledging fear and acting despite it," Richard replied, his demeanor shifting to one of mentorship. "You admitted your mistake, and that alone speaks to a will for growth." The echo of flight's duality danced in her mind, the exodus from ignorance towards enlightenment, from isolation towards empathy. Gail watched as Richard stood, his shadow extending across the desk between them, casting light on the path forward. "A story began over those clouds," Richard mused, "and while our part has concluded, yours continues. What you choose to write next can redefine chapters." The parting words made a lasting imprint, akin to the lasting contrail of an aircraft marking the vast sky. As Gail left Richard's office, she perceived, for perhaps the first time, the contours of a story not singularly driven by ambition but uplifted by humility and understanding. Stepping into the open air, the sun danced across her skin, warming her thoughts with the promise of new beginnings. Each step away from the echoing corridors of Skyline's hub was one towards redemption, the accidental sage's counsel swirling within her like an invigorating wind propelling her onward. Her journey to self-redemption was not over, but neither was it at risk of derailing. As Gail reconciled the balance between justice and humanity, she resolved to extend the same compassion to herself that she now vowed to offer others. In the days that followed, she committed herself to never repeat the errors that overshadowed that fateful flight, a fortified resolve, winged by the recognition that life's greatest ascent comes from owning our missteps and redefining our skies thereafter. Days passed in a haze of introspection, each one pulling Gail Harper further from the sureness she had once polished so meticulously. Her nights became a battleground of restless dreams, where turbulent skies mirrored her tumultuous inner world. Every action, every slip of judgment on that infamous flight haunted her like specters, pushing her toward a more profound revelation about herself. At work, she found herself separated from the colleagues who once greeted her warmly, a silent sentence of solitary reflection. Each inquiry by management was a reminder of her fall from grace, a catalyst that propelled her desperation to find personal redemption. But with every moment of silent penance spent in her small apartment overlooking the bustling city, Gail felt the stirrings of a determination she hadn't yet recognized. It whispered through her like a gentle breeze, suggesting that perhaps this wasn't an end but a beginning she had never seen coming. Her arrival at Richard Brooks's threshold felt like the moment before takeoff, the engines thrumming beneath her feet, the gravitational pull both frightening and exhilarating. She stood at the precipice, waiting for clearance to ascend into unknown skies. The moment she entered Richard's welcoming office was a leap of faith, not into the void of judgment she feared, but into an atmosphere charged with potential and understanding. Following her meeting with Richard, Gail didn't just walk out of his office. She emerged, carrying with her a seed of resolve sparked by their encounter. The idea of translating her contrition into action took root, nurtured by his encouragement to redefine the chapters of her journey. Richard's parting words echoed in her mind, resonating with the truth she hadn't fully embraced. Her story was not just her own. It was intertwined with every life she touched, every passenger to whom she owed safety and respect in the skies of Skyline Aviation. Gail's first step towards redemption began within the very heart of the airline, where her professional journey had ascended to new heights. Backed by Richard's quiet endorsement, she proposed a program aimed at channeling the unexpected inner turbulence into education and empathy, a comprehensive initiative on diversity and inclusion for the airline industry. It was met with skepticism at first, her past actions casting long shadows on her newfound aspirations. But Gail's sincerity crackled through her presentations like electricity, igniting a flicker of respect even among the most doubtful. Her vision was clear. "We need to construct bridges where there are divides," she explained, her voice gaining momentum as she addressed the board in Skyline's sprawling conference room. "Our passengers place their trust in us to carry them safely above the clouds, and it's imperative that trust is reciprocated in every aspect. This includes seeing them as more than just ticket holders." She crafted workshops harnessed from raw, personal experience, inviting voices of the marginalized to share their narratives. Her own encounter, once the source of shame, became a powerful anecdote presented with humility and openness. Gail recounted her journey of growth not as an endpoint but as a perpetual journey, a beacon to encourage reflection and dialogue. As the initiative gained momentum, drawing in both industry veterans and fresh talents, Gail discovered that leading with transparency paved the way for genuine connection. Her office turned into a gathering place for brainstorming sessions and shared visions for a more compassionate horizon. Contrary to her initial assumptions, each interaction reinforced her humanity rather than detracting from it, a guiding principle that overshadowed her self-imposed limits. Months passed, and the training program, initially viewed as an experiment, was lauded for its innovative approach and profound impact, with results that rippled through the airline industry. Other companies took note, inviting Gail to share her methods and insights. At these conferences, her voice never trembled, grounded now in something more profound than mere ambition, a purpose that resonated with the ideals of unity Richard Brooks had instilled in her. "The challenge," she would tell them, her words weaving stories that transcended PowerPoint slides, "is not simply to recognize the beauty in diversity, but to actively include it within the fabric of everything we do. A sky filled with endless opportunities is meaningless if not every traveler can claim a piece of it." Such authentic expressions were met with applause, resonating with audiences hungry for change, desperate to soar beyond the constraints of industry norms. And through this journey, Gail found herself surrounded by allies as passionate as she had become, people who uplifted her spirits and fortified her dream with their shared enthusiasm for change. Yet, among all her achievements, it was the unexpected moments of personal connection that renewed her spirit. When Richard's family, once mere passengers in a web of misunderstanding, attended a symposium for diversity she had orchestrated, Gail's heart clenched with a bittersweet gratitude. As they approached her after the session, their smiles spoke volumes, far more than spoken words could capture. In that moment, Gail had truly touched the lives she once feared she had irreparably scarred. "Thank you, Gail," Richard said, his voice carrying the warmth of a father guiding his children through life's storms. "You've turned a moment of conflict into an opportunity for growth. That's the best we can ask for." Those words were a benediction, erasing whispers of doubt still lodged in her mind. Gail knew her mistakes would never disappear entirely. They'd always be part of her history. But now, in the clarity of Richard's acknowledgement, they no longer defined her. They accentuated her transformation. Later that evening, leaning against her balcony rail with the piercing city lights sprawled beneath her, Gail pondered the nuanced balance she had discovered between justice and humanity. The skyline stretched endlessly, each beacon of light a testament to individual journeys converging into a spectacular vista. It was here, amid the hum of the city and the remnants of day dissolving into night, that Gail truly understood she was at peace with herself. In the end, Gail Harper realized she had transcended her need for external validation. Her role was not just a title, it was a vocation. The real reward lay not in accolades, but in changing the world one flight, one conversation, one human interaction at a time. As she took a long, deliberate breath of the chill evening air, she felt unquestionably alive, ready to embrace whatever the skies held next. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm amber glow over the sprawling cityscape, Gail Harper leaned against her balcony rail, contemplating the winding road that had brought her to this moment. Her journey, once mired in layers of self-doubt and error, had transformed into a landscape of self-discovery and growth. These past months had been a crucible of change, refining her rough edges into facets of self-awareness and empathy. The initiative she spearheaded at Skyline Aviation blossomed beyond her expectations, as employees from all corners of the company engaged in meaningful dialogues and embraced the rich tapestry of voices that once lay subdued. Gail had learned to listen, truly listen, breaking away from the habitual scripts of everyday life. This shift in perspective became the cornerstone upon which she anchored her efforts to effect lasting change. One evening, gathered with her new team around a polished mahogany conference table, Gail recounted the genesis of their collective mission. Her voice, steady yet vibrant, infused the room with an atmosphere of hopeful anticipation. "When I first proposed this program," she began, her gaze sweeping across faces that reflected belief and inspiration, "I didn't anticipate the breadth of its impact. We're not just altering policies. We're reshaping the narrative of what it means to belong in this industry." Karen, a fellow advocate in the diversity initiative, nodded thoughtfully. "Gail, what we've done, it's remarkable. The walls of this old place are finally echoing with stories that matter." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the room, testament to the solidarity they had forged. These were the moments Gail cherished most, gatherings in which past barriers fizzled into shared values and new, untethered flights toward equality. As others mingled after the meeting, Gail retreated to her desk, the quiet of the office a comforting shell. She picked up the framed photograph of the Brooks family, taken during their visit to the symposium she had tirelessly organized. Their expressions, warm, sincere, forgiving, served as her lodestar, guiding her through the turbulence she once faced alone. Several colleagues approached, exchanging ideas and experiences that only deepened their collective resolve. Each story, a thread, wove into the fabric of a beautifully diverse quilt, a testament to the progress they'd championed together. It was in these small moments of connection that Gail found her greatest peace, a living tapestry of change, stitched by the sincerity and courage of countless voices. Then, one winter evening, an unexpected call disrupted her usual routine. Her phone buzzed at her desk with Richard Brooks on the line. "Gail, may I have a moment?" His voice resonated with a gracious familiarity. "Of course, Mr. Brooks," she replied, her curiosity piqued by his directness. Without preamble, Richard launched into the purpose of his call. "We're holding a leadership summit next month, focusing on advancing diversity across industries. It's a platform I believe your insights would greatly benefit. Would you join me in presenting?" The offer was monumental, a testament to her efforts and the trust that had blossomed from past adversity. "Richard, Mr. Brooks, I'd be honored," Gail said, her heart fluttering with a mix of humility and excitement. As the weeks flew by, anticipation built alongside meticulous preparation. Gail crafted her speech, weaving personal anecdotes with broader themes of inclusion and resilience, revealing not just her journey but the communal odyssey she withstood with colleagues and allies. Finally, the day of the summit arrived, ushering in a cold but brilliantly clear morning. The venue, a shimmering testament to progress, buzzed with participants from every corner of the business world. That morning, Gail stood facing a packed ballroom, the air thrumming with expectation. Richard introduced her with heartfelt sincerity. "Here today to speak on building bridges where there once were walls as not just a leader or a colleague but a friend. Gail Harper has shown us how strength emerges through empathy and connection." The applause that greeted her was thunderous. But as she stepped forward, it was the quietude within her that set the stage for her words. Gail spoke from the heart, conveying the urgency of empathy and the enduring power of stories redeemed through connection and understanding. "We've learned to soar together," she concluded, her gaze unwavering. "And in doing so, we ensure the skies are open for everyone who dreams to fly." The standing ovation lasted minutes, yet within that embrace of applause, Gail found the rarest validation, not of title or position, but of human connection, empathy, and growth. Later, Richard approached her amidst the throng of attendees congratulating her. "Gail, today you spoke with a clarity and warmth that touched everyone here," he said, his eyes crinkling with genuine pride. "Thank you, Richard," she replied, her tone filled with gratitude, "for seeing who I could become, even when I couldn't." As the evening wore on, Gail wandered the elegantly illuminated venue, absorbing the resonance of this monumental day. Conversations around her buzzed with newfound enthusiasm and visions for a future bright with inclusivity and equity. Ultimately, as she left the event beneath a canopy of stars, Gail knew she had found her true calling. Each conversation, each connection, had not only restored her integrity but had also renewed her commitment to effecting change one human interaction at a time. Gail returned to her city view, where the lights twinkled in the distance, a constellation of dreams and aspirations reflecting back at her. Here, in the heart of this vibrant tapestry, she had found her purpose: to affirm the value of every voice and to help foster a world where every diversity matters. With a deep breath of crisp evening air, Gail Harper embraced the infinite sky, prepared to navigate whatever journey lay ahead, her spirit alight with a resolute joy that only the promise of new horizons could bring.